Do you know this place? This is El Presidio de Santa Barbara, just a few blocks from Santa Barbara Junior High. I'm Randy Bergstrom, a historian. I research and teach at UCSB. I'm here with you today to use this historic site to help with your project, Where We Are From. Your project makes us know that to mark a site historically does not only prevent it from further development, but opens it to new research, to new questions, to new uses and interpretation. As you tell your stories, work on your stories, we'll use this place to tell the other side of where we are from. And that is the history of the where, the story of Santa Barbara's history. When and where we begin that story is important. We choose this spot because it reminds us that people have been gathering here for hundreds of years. But people were gathering here before there was a Presidio, before the 200 years of the Presidio and Santa Barbara. Let's look around and imagine the place without the roads, without the buildings, as it was prior to the Spanish getting here. As you do that, as you subtract, take the buildings and the roads out of the landscape, now put the people back in, the people who were here. And imagine the place with the thousands of people who were already living here for hundreds of generations, for thousands of years when the Spanish arrived. The Chumash, think about that, hundreds of generations. You, your parents and your grandparents, 3 generations, maybe that's 75 years. We're talking hundreds of generations, and the Chumash are still making Santa Barbara what it is today. When you start the story there and then, with thousands of Chumash already living here when the Spanish arrived, that tells you something important about the story. That is that Santa Barbara has been made by those people who were here encountering people who migrated here, those who built the Presidio. When the Spanish came, the Spanish colonists, they came with the intent to colonize Santa Barbara, that is to stay, to build this place and to remain. Which is one last reason why I'm standing here, because the people who came for Spain to build this Presidio really remained. That is, if you were standing here with me on these grounds, you'd be standing on the bodily remains of the soldados and their families, those who came for Spain, died, and were buried here. We know that in part by the written record, by the records that is the primary source, the records recorded at the time which have come down to us. We know it in part, too, by archaeologists' work, that is, digs on the site that have discovered remains, or high-tech electronic surveillance of the grounds, which have found over 100 remains on this site. What do we know about the people who came here for Spain? We talk about the people who lived here in the 1780s to the 1840s as Chumash or Spanish, but what the evidence tells us is much richer, much more exciting, and tells us a deeper story of early Santa Barbara. We know from a roll of soldiers and their families, the 61 soldiers and their officers who enlisted and crossed the Sonoran Desert to come here, that the Spanish, by their Spanish categorization, these were people who were indigenous or Indios, people who had parentage which were indigenous and European, who were mestizo, or people who had African as well as European ancestry. The Spanish termed these mulatto. Santa Barbara's roots then, in the Spanish era, were global. Santa Barbara was made up of people indigenous to North America, plus people who would have heritage from Africa, plus people with heritage from Europe. And this is where they lived. When they came, they lived in the fort, in the wall of the fort, and this is one of the oldest buildings in California, El Cuartel. It remains from the original fort and were the quarters of the soldados that they built in the 1780s. So this is El Cuartel, the second oldest standing building in California. part of the original Presidio, the place where soldiers lived, built in to the inner defense wall. Let's go in and take a look. So what do you think? Could you live here? When I bring students from UCSB here, they look around and they go, this is great. How much is the rent? This is bigger than the place I live. Over time, this place changed. People added fireplace, they added a kitchen, they added a bathroom. But it remained a residence even as the surrounding city changed after the fort was decommissioned. One story tells us a lot about the nature of who we are and where we're from, and that is the life of Jose Jesus Valenzuela. He was the last gatekeeper of the Presidio, lived here in these quarters, El Cuartel. When he was the gatekeeper, he was employed by the Spanish Empire. When Spain was overthrown, colonialism overthrown by Mexico, he became a Mexican citizen. And then, at the end of his life, he became an American citizen. So Valenzuela, though one person living in one spot, was first Spanish, then Mexican, then a US citizen. And we know that he identified himself this way because in 1865, as the American nation was fighting its civil war, Jose Valenzuela recruited other Santa Barbarans to create the Santa Barbara Lancers, go off and fight against the Confederates coming into California in the American Civil War. So what this says is the building remained the same, the person remained the same, but the city around it, the context, the nation changed. And that's a critical part of the story of where we are from. So don't just take our word for it. Don't just trust the video. You should come down here, just blocks from your school, when COVID is passed, and stand in this quarters and think about this place that was first Chumash land, then part of the Presidio, a fort, and then became integrally a home in Santa Barbara across the 19th century.